What's going on, everyone? This Droctagonal here. Now, today, we got ourselves a special episode of the 3 Minutes on the Clock podcast series. It's not going to be uploaded on Saturday, not like a usual mock draft video or anything. Today, we have the ultimate guide to the 2019 NFL Draft Part 1. So, basically, mostly talking about the Combine. However, we're also going to be talking about where these players could end up, like what area of the draft or what team. So, I hope you guys are excited. I hope you guys enjoy. And also, on the bottom, you may see my big board. That is because I had some help from my good friend, your boy AP85. He was the one who made the graphic for me. I will leave his link in the description, and you can go ahead and subscribe to him. He posts very entertaining Madden and NBA 2K content. Let's start with a big one, shall we? Dwayne Haskins, quarterback, Ohio State. Haskins did not participate in most of the testing. The only ones he did were the 40-yard dash and the vert jump. It says very jump. I think it's probably going to say very jump for all of them, but that's supposed to be vertical jump. My bad. I don't have time to change it. I'm kind of on a time crunch here. But anyway, taking a look at Haskins, he's a very solid pocket passer, pretty strong arm, and pretty accurate. He's not great outside the pocket, and as you can see by his 40-yard dash, he's not particularly fast. I think mobility will be his biggest weakness. Definitely going to be more of a pocket passer in the league. 28.5 vertical jump, definitely not one of the higher ones compared to a lot of the other players. So I don't think his stock will really change, but I don't think he really helped himself. So it definitely didn't go higher. Maybe it goes a little bit lower, but I still think he'll be the second quarterback taken, since it seems more and more likely that Kyler Murray will be the first one. Where he could end up, I definitely expect him to go in the top 10, maybe the top 5. Teams in play are the Giants, maybe the Jaguars, but probably not since they signed Nick Foles, or they're likely to sign Nick Foles. The Broncos, the Dolphins, the Redskins. I think the Giants are definitely the clear favorite, and right now that's where I sort of expect him to likely end up, even though I did have them getting Cody Ford the other day. So I think it'll be either the Giants or the Dolphins who gets him. Next up, we have Kyler Murray, who did not participate in any of the Combine events. All he did was get measured, and that's why his stock is going up. He is an official 5'10" and an 8', 207 pounds, which is bigger than most people thought. And a lot of rumors from the Combine suggest that Cliff Kingsbury and the Cardinals are very interested in selecting Kyler Murray #1 overall. It seems likely that Kyler will become either a Cardinal, or if someone like Oakland or Miami or the Giants trade up. I don't necessarily see Washington get him. I think Washington's the favorite for Josh Rosen if the Cardinals go ahead and get Murray. And then the Jaguars, as I mentioned, are probably going to get Nick Foles. So if the Cardinals get Kyler Murray, where does Rosen go? Obviously, it could be the Redskins. I think New England could be in play. I think it'll probably be one of those two teams. I think Rosen on New England would be really scary. Not that I'm much of a Rosen fan, but I definitely think Bill Belichick could develop him. Kyler Murray, I'm not going to quite rank him above the Haskins personally, but Kyler Murray is very good outside the pocket. He probably would have ran sub 4.35, 40-yard dash, super athletic, super explosive, and he has a pretty good arm as well. Next up is Drew Lock from Missouri, and I think overall, he had a very solid Combine, and I think his stock will move a little bit higher. I think he's now the for sure #3 quarterback in this year's draft. Denver is definitely the favorite to get him, so probably in that 10 range is where I expect him to go. Maybe Washington or Miami trades up, but I think it'll likely be Denver. I know John Elway is a big fan of him. Locke ran sub 4.7, so he's quick. He's pretty mobile, and he looked pretty good during the tests. He has a solid arm, and he's a very well-rounded player. He was inconsistent at times for Missouri, but I think Denver or whoever gets him is getting themselves a pretty good quarterback, and the rest of his athletic testing was pretty solid as well. Next up, we have Daniel Jones, quarterback, Duke, and his stock didn't really change. He didn't really have a super eventful Combine. 4.81 40, looked all right during the test, so his evaluation for me didn't really change too much. I still think he's probably a late first-round prospect. I expect him to go in the mid-first, maybe late first. maybe early second. So probably anywhere between 15 and 35 is my best guess. Where he could go, maybe Washington, maybe a team looking for a replacement at quarterback like Pittsburgh or Kansas City. Maybe in round 2, if he falls, a team like the Giants could snag him, or if they don't get Nick Foles, the Jaguars could snag him, which I think that makes sense. Maybe Miami gets him at 13 if all the other 3 quarterbacks are gone, which I think the other 3 quarterbacks will go in the top 10. So I guess 13 to 35 is a better area of where Daniel Jones could end up. Jones has been a solid but not great player at Duke. He was very good in the bowl game against Temple, who doesn't really have many NFL caliber defenders outside of Rocky Sin. So overall, he didn't really change, in my opinion, too much. Next up is Will Grier from West Virginia. Will Grier has never been a player I've really liked, but for me personally, I would say he's sort of moved up my rankings. I believe I put him at 6 or 7 now for best quarterback. He had a solid combine. I don't think his stock in the actual NFL draft will change too much. I still expect him to go in round 2. I had the Bengals trading up and getting him. I think that's a very real possibility. Maybe New England, maybe New Orleans, probably not New Orleans. Maybe if they don't get a quarterback in the first round, the Giants or the Dolphins or the Redskins. Grier does have a very wonky throwing motion, but he is very accurate. 4.8, 4.40 is a subpar 40. So I think he'll be an average to below average quarterback in the NFL. Maybe a bottom tier starter, sort of like where Andy Dalton and Ryan Tannehill are. I think that's about how good he can be at best, which is better than how I thought he'd be 2 weeks ago. Last quarterback we're going to be looking at is Tyree Jackson from Buffalo. Jackson's always been a player who I've really liked the past season during the draft process, and the combine sort of assures me of that. I expect his stock to go higher. He ran a 4.59 40-yard dash, which I believe is second for all quarterbacks, behind Trace McSorley, who isn't really much of a prospect. Probably going to go in the late 7 for undrafted, and he might not even play quarterback. I know there are rumors he could play defensive back, so Trace McSorley doesn't fully count. So technically, Tyree Jackson had the fastest 40-yard dash for quarterbacks. Jackson reminds me a lot of Josh Allen coming out of Wyoming last year. Small school, so didn't get to play big competition. Big frames, pretty mobile, very strong arm, but accuracy is not their strong suit. I liked Allen coming out of Wyoming, and I'm a big fan of Jackson as well. I expect him to go in either rounds 2, 3, or 4. I don't think it'll be a team that absolutely needs a quarterback like the Dolphins or the Redskins. I think it's going to be a team that semi-needs a quarterback like the Bengals, or a team that has an older quarterback, maybe looking to move on. A team like Pittsburgh, even though I am high on Mason Rudolph, or New England, or as I mentioned earlier, even though he's still playing very well, New Orleans, and I guess you could throw the Chargers in there as well. But I think New England would be a very interesting fit. I'd love to see how Bill Belichick would develop him. I think that would be very interesting if Bill Belichick could. Tyree Jackson isn't necessarily New England prototype system. However, I think that would be interesting having him there. I did mock him to New England with the last pick in the second round in my mock draft the other day, and that could happen. So I'm very curious to see where he goes and if he develops. Now we will be taking a look at running back. So Josh Jacobs, the number 1 running back in the class, was not healthy. He did not participate. I guess I will go over him a little bit since this is a guide on the draft. Jacobs did not have a lot of production at Alabama. He wasn't the main ball carrier. This guy right here, Damian Harris, was one of the main carriers along with Najee Harris. But when he got the ball, Josh Jacobs was very electrifying, pretty agile, pretty powerful as well. So I guess that's background on him. And you can sort of say the same about Damian Harris. He has some power. He's pretty solid with the ball as well. He had an okay combine. His stock didn't really change for me. I still view him as a late second, early third round prospect. And I still expect him to go in round 2 of this year's draft. If you cannot tell, this is a relatively weak running back class. But one guy who definitely stood out during the combine was Justice Hill from Oklahoma State. Hill is tiny. I believe he's around 5'8", 5'9", so certainly not the biggest frame, but he is super explosive. He ran a 4.4 flat 40 with a 40-inch vertical and a 130-inch broad jump. He was definitely my biggest winner for the running back spot at the Combine. I had him going to Kansas City in the second round of my mock draft, which I could see happening. I expect him to go in rounds 2 or 3. Don't think he can be like a bell cow running back, but I think a team looking for a change of pace running back, I think an interesting one would be the New Orleans Saints if Mark Ingram doesn't stay, which I don't know if he will. Kamara and Hill would be a really fun duo, so very curious to see where he ends up and how he will be used at the next level. Next up, we have David Montgomery from Iowa State, and I think his stock went down a little bit. He didn't really impress me during the Combine. 4.63 speed, 28.5 vertical jump. Just overall not that great. I know he's a little bit more powerful rather than agile. However, I do think his athletic measurables were a little bit underwhelming. I expect him to go probably late second, early third, around the same area where Justice Hill goes. In my mock draft, I had the Jets trading up and getting him in the middle of the second round, and I could see the Jets getting him. I do think that they do need a running back, as Isaiah Crowell and Bilal Powell probably won't be back next year. So probably in that range is where I expect him to end up. Next up, we have wide receiver, and why not start it off with DK Metcalf from Ole Miss. Definitely the talk of the town this weekend in Indianapolis. As looking at Metcalf, 6'3", 233 pounds, with 1.6% body fat. He definitely knows how to keep his body in shape. As you can see with the picture, he looks frickin' jacked. And then looking at his athletic numbers, 4.33, 40-yard dash, which for his size is incredible, with a 40.5-inch vertical jump, a 134-inch broad jump, and not to mention 27 reps on the bench, good 3-cone and 20-yard shuttle as well. So Metcalf has definitely moved as the number 1 receiver in the draft class for me, and he's also now the number 1 offensive player on my big board ahead of all the offensive linemen, like Cody Ford and Jonah Williams. Metcalf is now 6th on my overall board. He really impressed me in the Combine, and he's had a solid career for Ole Miss. He does have some injury concerns, but he's a big-bodied receiver. He can go up where Grandma hides the cookies, and he has very similar measurables to Calvin Johnson. As you all know, I'm a Lions fan. I love Calvin Johnson. DK right here reminds me a lot of him. Where he could end up, I expect him to go in the top 15, maybe top 10, maybe a team like Buffalo or Miami, or if Miami doesn't get a quarterback, that is, or Denver, maybe one of those teams looking for a big-bodied receiver. I would say right now Buffalo is the favorite. In my latest mock, I had him going to Baltimore at 22. That's before he exploded. And if he's available at 22, I'm sure Baltimore would be happy to take him. Before we continue with the rest of the receivers, I figured I'd tell you guys about a receiver who missed the Combine because of injuries. That is Marquise Hollywood Brown of Oklahoma. Brown is a burner, probably would have ran in the 4.3 range. Deep threat, he can stretch the field. I've had him going to Oakland a lot, and I think that's a really nice fit. I think having someone who can stretch the field for the Raiders is they don't have a lot of deep threats at receiver. In my latest mock, I believe I had him going to Indianapolis. Him and T.Y. Hilton would go really well together. So the next receiver we have is N'Keal Harry, number 2 receiver on my board. He ran a 4.53 40-yard dash, and I think that's a good time for him. I thought he'd run something in the 4.6s, so he's faster than I thought. And he's had a very explosive, very productive career at Arizona State. He was my number 1 receiver for a while. Very polished player, good hands, good route runner, and unlike Metcalf, it's a sure thing that Harry's going to be a good player in the NFL, whereas Metcalf is more of a boomer bust. I expect N'Keal Harry to go in the late first, early second, maybe Indianapolis or Baltimore, or maybe even Pittsburgh, which is where I had him going in my last mock draft. I had Pittsburgh trading up with the 49ers in the second round, with Antonio Brown being involved in that deal, and I had the Steelers getting N'Keal Harry with that pick. I expect him to be picked in the first round. However, if he doesn't, then the Steelers could trade up and get him. Next receiver we have here is A.J. Brown from Ole Miss. He ended up running a 4.49, which I think is a very solid time for him. He's a very good route runner, one of the better ones in this draft class. He has pretty good hands as well, so like N'Keal Harry, he's a very polished player. 36.5-inch vertical jump, 120-inch broad jump, so he can leap as well. I expect him to go in the same range as Harry, probably late first, early second. I want to say I had New England picking him at 32, which I think makes a lot of sense. Definitely the type of player who New England likes. Good route runner, good in the short routes, which we all know Tom Brady loves those checkdowns. So I think he'd be a really nice fit in New England. I think it's a pretty good chance he does get picked in round 1, but if he doesn't, he'll go in the early second. Before we talk about Riley Ridley, there's another receiver I just thought of who I didn't make one of these things for. That was Hakeem Butler from Iowa State. He's a player who I really like, sort of like Metcalf, where they're both big frames. Both can go upstairs where grandma hides the cookies. Butler had a very nice 40-yard dash time. I think it was sub 4.5, so I don't know why I didn't make one for him. But next we have Riley Ridley from Georgia. He was definitely one of the biggest losers of the Combine, and I think most of the Georgia players definitely did not help themselves. Funny that the graphics person, as I mentioned, AP, is a Georgia fan. But Riley Ridley, he's a really good route runner, but 4.58 40-yard dash, definitely not what you were hoping for. Isn't quite as explosive as his brother Calvin Ridley, who had a really solid year with Atlanta. Ridley had a good 40 time. I don't know if it was sub 4.4, but it was definitely better than Riley Ridley. And because of that, I think Ridley's probably going to fall to the 3rd round now. In my last mock, I had my Detroit Lions getting him in the 2nd round. And now that looks a little bit like a reach. If we get him in the 3rd round, I would be pretty happy. But after a bad combine, certainly not what Riley Reef was looking for, and he definitely didn't make any money. The next guy we have here is Paris Campbell from The Ohio State University. Campbell is a very interesting prospect. I had him mocked to the Browns in the 2nd round of my last mock, so he gets to stay in state. I know he said he'd love to play for the Browns, and I view him as sort of like an X factor in the NFL more than a wide receiver. And what I mean by that is a team can use him in numerous positions: wide receiver, running back, special teams. I like his versatility and what he could bring to an offense. 4.31 40-yard dash. We expected him to run a good 40, and he definitely did that, one of the best in this year's Combine. I would say he definitely helped out his stock and could maybe go in the late 1st round. I don't think he'll be a 1st-round pick. I expect him to go in the early 2nd. Maybe a team like Tampa Bay. I know they don't really need a receiver, but I feel like they need that super explosive playmaker on their offense. As Evans, big play threat guy, same with Godwin, but I feel like Paris Campbell is an X factor for them, would make a ton of sense. As Deshaun Jackson wants out, I believe Adam Humphries is a free agent, and that would be a really nice trio at wide receiver. Next up, we have T.J. Hawkinson from Iowa. He is my number 2 tight end in the class. I've always had Noah Fant ahead of him, and after the Combine, I still do. Hawkinson, I've seen him go very high in mock drafts. I've seen him go in the top 10 numerous times to teams like the Jaguars and the Lions. I don't see it. I definitely don't think the Lions are. We all know the Eric Ebron experiment did not work out for them. Funny that he played extremely well this year for the Indianapolis Colts. I expect him to go in the high to mid-teens. Maybe he could fall to the low teens. I had Pittsburgh getting him at 20 in my last mock. And yeah, that's not Pittsburgh's biggest need, but they could use a tight end. And with Hawkinson on the board, that's really nice value. And at least half of the comments on that video were Steelers fans disagreeing with that pick. Which, yeah, as I said, that's not their biggest position of need. But Hawkinson's a very good player on the board. And 2 of their other bigger needs, receiver and cornerback, they addressed in round 2. Hawkinson's a very well-rounded player, good run blocker, and he is a good pass catcher as well, solid route runner. He's not an insane athlete. 37.5 vert jump is very solid, and a 4.7 40 is definitely not anything to complain about. Where he could go, as I mentioned, the Steelers, maybe a team like Cincinnati if they're looking for a tight end. I could see maybe them pulling the trigger since Tyler Eifert probably won't be back next year. The Bengals do have bigger needs, yes, but same thing with the Steelers. There aren't going to be many better players on the board than him. Next up is my man, Noah Fant, also from Iowa. I've been a huge fan of Fant for a while. He had a phenomenal combine, which didn't really shock me. I would say his stock did go up a little bit. In my opinion, it didn't really go up, but I'm still a huge fan of his game. Reminds me a lot of Evan Engram coming out of Ole Miss a few years ago. Engram has a wide receiver skill set, wide receiver build, but can play tight end and is a decent enough blocker to do so. Fant ran a 4.5. I believe Engram ran a 4.42. I think Engram's more like a receiver than Fant is. I think Fant's more of a little bit more of a prototypical tight end, but he's more of an Evan Engram than a pure blocking tight end for sure. 39.5-inch vertical jump. What else can you expect? This man is an insane vertical threat. I think he's going to be a superstar in no time. Where do I think he will go? I think he's going to go in probably the late first, probably between picks 20 to 32. I know the Packers are in the market for a tight end, potentially. I hope that doesn't happen. Same thing with New England. I hope that doesn't happen. I forget where I had him in my last mock. I think at 30 to Green Bay. Don't quote me on that. So that's probably around where he's going to end up. If he does, then I'll be kind of sad. Last up is, for tight ends, is Irv Smith Jr. from Alabama. His stock, I would say, definitely moved up. I think he has a chance to be picked in the late first round now. I had him going to Denver in round 2 at pick 40, which in that range I could see happening. He ran a 4.6 3.40. He had a solid combine. He wasn't insane. He wasn't Noah Fant good, but he had an all-around well combine. I don't think that's correct grammar. He had an all-around good combine. He's a player who I do like. Solid pass catcher, solid run blocker, and I do expect him to be a good player in the NFL. He brings you the total package, I would say, and I think whoever gets him is getting a really solid player. Next up, looking at the offensive lineman, we have Jonas Williams from Alabama. I almost called him Jonas Smith. I guess I was thinking Irv Smith, Alabama. I don't know. But I don't think his stock really changed. I would say he has dropped a little bit the past few months. It seems like he was going to be a top 3, top 5 pick. Now he could go in the middle of the first round, which isn't too bad of a drop, but still, he is losing on millions and millions of dollars if that does happen. He had an all-around decent combine. 23 reps on the bench isn't great. So I guess he had a below-average combine, but athleticism isn't necessarily his bread and butter, I would say. He can play right tackle as well as right guard, and he can probably play left tackle too. Pretty agile, pretty solid in the pass as well as the run game. Wasn't great in the national championship, but he was taking on Cleveland Ferrell, who is quite a good player. I expect him to go between picks 5 and 15. I had him going to the Bucs in my last 2 mock drafts at 5. That might be a little bit high. Maybe Buffalo at 9. Maybe a team like Carolina at 16 if he's still available. I think him and Taylor Moton could make a really nice offensive tackle duo, assuming Darrell Williams leaves. Next up, we have Greg Little from Ole Miss. I definitely think his stock went down, and I would say his stock has certainly gone down a little bit the past couple of weeks, and now it's definitely not a sure thing that he's a first-round pick. He didn't even do the bench press, which is a little bit shaky, so we don't even know how he would do on that. But athletically, definitely is not his strong suit. He's a very solid player right away, and I think he'll contribute early. I had the Eagles getting him at 29. I think that's a solid fit, as Jason Peters is on his last legs. Hasn't officially announced he's staying. I don't think he has yet. So maybe Little gets a redshirt year or 2 if he goes there, and I expect that to be the range where he ends up, probably between picks 25 and 40, which had he had a good combine probably will be like 15 and 25. So it's a shame for him that he didn't do well, but I do think he'll still be a pretty good player in the NFL. Solid pass blocker, pretty good of a run too, but definitely a disappointing performance in the combine. Next up, we have Cody Ford. He is my number 1 offensive lineman, and the main reason I like him is his versatility. He can play guard as well as tackle, and I would say he's a little bit more proven than Jonah Williams is. Lots of production for Oklahoma. He's been super good, and he's one of the biggest reasons why Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray each have Heisman trophies, and both of them could be number 1 overall picks in the NFL as well. Ford wasn't insanely good during the combine. 19 reps on the bench is not great, but I do think he'll probably be a top 10, if not top 15 pick. I had him going to the Giants in my last mock. I could see that a team like the Bucs or the Giants, maybe even the Jets taking a reach. Maybe Buffalo looks at him. So I think any of those teams could definitely add him onto their roster. Next up, we have Garrett Bradbury, the center from NC State, and his stock definitely moved up. He had himself a very nice combine, sub-5 40-yard dash, 34 reps on the bench, and his stock has continued to rise for the past couple weeks. He had a good Senior Bowl, and I really like what he's doing. I expect him to go in the first round now. I'm pretty sure I had him going 27 to Oakland, and yes, they do have Rodney Hudson, but I think he's a player they should look to shop because he's on a pretty big contract and he's getting up there. I think a 4th round pick for him is somewhat fair value. I think that might be a little bit too much for a team to give up for an old, expensive center, but Rodney Hudson is one of the best ones in the NFL. But Bradbury was excellent during the combine. His name will continue to rise during drafts and will continue to go up people's draft boards. Another offensive lineman who had a really good Senior Bowl and followed that up with a really good combine is Andre Dillard from Washington State. I've accidentally said Washington 2 mock drafts in a row. So yes, he is from Washington State. The Wazoo Cougars, okay? Do we get it? Alright, there. Dillard is a very athletic tackle. 4'9", 640, 24 reps on the bench, which is solid. Pretty good 3-cone, pretty good 20-yard shuttle, solid jumping. I still view him as a late first, early second round prospect because I just don't see the production in college. Yeah, he was a good player in college, but he wasn't an insane player for the Cougars. He wasn't as good as like a Jonah Williams or a Cody Ford was for their respective teams. So I do think he's a little bit overrated in that sense, but he has definitely helped himself the past couple of months when it's come to the postseason stuff like the Senior Bowl and the Combine. I believe I had him going in the 2nd round in my last mock draft. The one before, I think I had him going to Minnesota at 18. Where he will end up, I think he's now going to be a 1st round pick. Probably anywhere between 10 and 30. I know that's a wide range, but I think he will go in any of those spots. So yeah, way to help yourself out, buddy. Before we talk about Nick Bosa and the defensive players in this year's draft class, I forgot one offensive lineman. That's Jawan Taylor from Florida. I could have sworn I made one of these things for him, but I guess I didn't. I guess it didn't save. Taylor's a very athletic player. He only did 1 combine test. That was the bench press, which he got 24 reps. Very solid, very athletic, agile player, and it looks like he will definitely be a 1st round pick. Someone who I expect to go in the top 20. Maybe a team like Carolina, Minnesota, Cincinnati. One of those teams I expect to probably pull the trigger on him. So now on to defense, starting with Nick Bosa, who's been the projected #1 overall pick for a while. But with Kyler Murray and Arizona being linked to each other now, I know the Niners are jumping for joy. Bosa is my #3 player in the draft. I'm not that high on him compared to other people, but I still really like him. Very solid pass rusher. Reminds me a lot of Joey Bosa. They had almost identical 40-yard dashes. I believe Nick's was like 200ths of a second faster. So 4.79 40, 29 reps on the bench, 33.5 vert jump. He had an all-around solid combine. He wasn't insane, but he was still good. And I expect him to be a very good player in the NFL. Definitely going to go in the top 2, maybe 1. We'll see with the Kyler Murray thing. But if Kyler goes #1, San Francisco's definitely picking him up at 2. Next up, we have Montez Sweat from Mississippi State. He is my #4 edge rusher in the class, and he was one of the biggest winners of the Combine. Seemed like he was probably going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick for most of the year. He had a good Senior Bowl and a good end of the season, which propelled him into 1st round conversation. And now after a good Combine, I could definitely see him going to the top 10. A team like the Lions could definitely pick him up, or maybe Green Bay at 12. Both of them have big needs for edge rushers, so I would not be surprised if he ends up in the NFC North with one of those teams. Obviously, the 40-yard dash is the one that stands out at you. 4.41, that is incredible. Quarterbacks, watch your back, because Montez Sweat is coming. Pretty good jumping and pretty good bench press as well, so all around, he had a phenomenal combine, and he is someone who could absolutely be a top 10 selection. Next up is Josh Allen from Kentucky. I definitely expect him to go in the top 5 or top 3. I've had him going number 2 to San Francisco for a while, but if Nick Bosa is on the board, they're definitely going to pick him there. And I'm quite sure that the Jets are either going to get Quinnen Williams or trade down. So I don't know if he's going to go number 3, but Oakland or Tampa Bay, probably going to definitely be in the top 5. Looking at his combine, very solid. Did not do a vert jump, but 28 reps on the bench, really good. 118-inch broad jump, 4.6 340. He's very versatile. You can put him in coverage. You can have him rushing the passer. 17.5 sacks last year for the Wildcats. And he's definitely someone who will be able to get to the quarterback in the National Football League as well. As I mentioned, definitely going to go in the top 5. It's just a matter of where he ends up. Next up is Brian Burns from Florida State. I was tempted to say his stock was unchanged. However, looking at his results, he tested well in everything that he went for. So I decided to give him higher. I don't think he'll go too much higher, but I expect him to probably go in the first half of the first round, probably between 10 and 20. Maybe a team like Green Bay or Carolina who needs an edge rusher. I definitely would expect one of those two teams to probably get him. 4.5 340, very solid. He's a good jumper, 36-inch vert jump. So all around, very athletic, and he's a very well-rounded pass rusher. He's pretty good at everything. No glaring weaknesses for him, in my opinion. And overall, I think he doesn't have an insane ceiling, but he has a very nice floor. One of my biggest losers of the Combine was Ja'Kai Polite from Florida. Nobody's really talking about him as a big loser, but in my opinion, he definitely is, as I viewed him very athletic when watching him. However, 4.3 440, 32-inch vert jump, and then he got injured. So, yeah, maybe that's injured, but he skipped the rest of the Combine. It didn't seem like a serious injury. When he was talking to other teams, from what I know, they weren't too huge with his answers, so that's not really great either. So all around, I think Ja'Kai Polite definitely had a disappointing Combine. Now I'm not sure if he goes in round 1. I've had him going to Tennessee in the past 2 mock drafts, and I think 19 now is a little bit high. I don't think that's a bad reach. I expect him to go now in the late first, early second. It's not like he's going to be picked in the 3rd round now, but I just don't think he's going to go as high as it seemed like he would, per se, last week. Maybe a team like the Rams, who I think kind of need an edge rusher with probably not bringing back Dante Fowler. I could see them getting him, and I think value-wise that'd be a solid pick. Last edge rusher we have is Rashawn Gary from Michigan. Some people view him as a D-tackle. Some people view him as an edge rusher. Personally, I view him more as a big edge rusher rather than an undersized defensive tackle. I didn't know whether I wanted to put him as his stock is unchanged or higher, but like Brian Burns, I think I'm going to put it at higher. He's someone who I absolutely think has a chance of going in the top 10, maybe Detroit at 8, maybe Denver at 10, maybe not Denver, they don't really need a defensive lineman. I could also see a team like the Panthers getting him, but a fit I'm really intrigued with is Atlanta at 14. They could use some help on the edge. They have Takk McKinley, who I like, but they could also need help inside. They did bring back Grady Jarrett. I'm not sure if it's on a franchise tag or a long-term deal. I'm going to have to look at that. But Gary can play both D-tackle as well as edge rusher, and whichever one he develops into more in the NFL, the Falcons have room at both of those positions to put him in. So I'd be very intrigued with Atlanta picking him up. Solid career at Michigan. Did not quite have as good of a junior year as most people expected, but that's because he got double-teamed all year, and a lot of people sort of have him falling off their boards because of that. I personally don't think you can get mad at him at that. It's not his fault that he's good. It's not his fault that he's getting double-teamed. So I did check. Grady Jarrett got franchise tagged, so who knows if they're going to bring him back. But next up, we have Clelin Ferrell from Clemson. His stock didn't really change for me. He's still my number 3 edge rusher. However, I'm very tempted to put numerous players ahead of him, but I'm not, just because Clelin Ferrell has been such a good player for Clemson, really good at rushing the passer. He decided not to run the 40 or do either of the jumping drills, which is very interesting. Solid bench press, solid pre-cone, 20 and 60-yard shuttles. Overall, he's a decent athlete. He's not crazy. I think that 40 would probably be in the 4.7s if I were to guess. And I like Brian Burns. I don't think he has a crazy high ceiling. However, his floor is pretty solid. So when I said Rashawn Gary was the last edge rusher I was looking at, that's a lie because I forgot about Furl. But anyway, next up we have Quinnen Williams from Alabama, my number 2 defensive tackle, and my number 2 player in the class behind Ed Oliver. And it's not a knock on him, it's just that I really like Ed Oliver. Quinnen had a very solid combine, but his stock doesn't really change because he's probably not going to go number 1, but at the same time, he's still going to go in the top 5. I expect probably the Jets to be the favorites. Maybe Arizona considers him at 1, or maybe, let's say, they trade down with, like, Oakland. They could certainly consider him at 4. Very nice 40-yard dash and very nice vert and broad jump. Didn't do the bench press, however, I'm definitely sure that he would have had a nice bench press. Williams is a very dominant interior presence in Bama's defensive line. Really good run stopper, decent pass rusher, and he's pretty athletic. So all around, he is a phenomenal player. Next up, we have Ed Oliver from Houston. I thought his stock would rise a little bit more because I thought he was going to have a really good combine. And his combine was very solid, but I don't think his stock will really change too much. Did not run the 40. I'm pretty sure he will at the Houston Pro Day. I expect it to be in the 4.7s or 4.8s, which for his size is absolutely incredible. 32 reps on the bench, which is very solid. 36-inch vert, 120-inch broad jump. Those are all really good. He's my number 1 player in the class. He reminds me so much of Aaron Donald, both of whom were a little bit undersized, but both of whom were super athletic, super good combines, and more of run stoppers than pass rushers. So I think they have a lot of similarities, and that's one of the main reasons why Oliver is, in my opinion, the best player in this draft class. Next up, we have Christian Wilkins from Clemson. Wilkins isn't an insane athlete, and I wasn't expecting him to have a crazy combine, which he didn't. But he also had a respectable combine. 5.04 40-yard dash, solid. 28 reps on the bench, solid. 29.5-inch vertical jump, solid. 107-inch broad jump, solid. Athleticism isn't necessarily his bread and butter, but stopping the run, making physical plays, that's where he comes in. That's why he's been so good for the past 4 years at Clemson. His stock has sort of been the same all year, and I don't expect it to change. Probably middle of the first round. I could see a team like Carolina, Cleveland, maybe Atlanta. Probably one of those teams ends up getting him. I did leave out some pretty good defensive tackles. Dexter Lawrence from Clemson got injured halfway through the combine. Very dominant athlete, dominant player. Super strong, super big. Really a good run stopper. And then Jerry Tillery, another player I like from Notre Dame. He had a good combine as well. Very solid run stopper for the Fighting Irish and the anchor of their defense. So now on to linebacker Devin White, a player I really like. Number 5 on my board. And he definitely helped himself out a little during the combine. I was tempted to give him higher, however, I don't think his stock is really going to change. I expect him to go between picks, maybe 6 and 11. Maybe Detroit gets him, maybe Denver gets him, maybe Cincinnati gets him. Maybe if Quan Alexander goes, the Bucs could get him at 5. The Raiders need a linebacker. If the Cardinals trade down, I think any of those teams could look at him. 4.42 40-yard dash. 39.5-inch vertical jump. That one jumps out at me. Get it? Vertical jump jumps out at me. No, that's corny. But White, really solid 3-down linebacker. Very well-rounded, all-around explosive player. Reminds me a lot of Roquan Smith with a pretty good rookie year with the Bears. And as a Lions fan, I'd be very happy with him, as Jared Davis might be moved sort of to a pass rusher role, and our defense would continue to get better. Another middle linebacker named Devin who had a nice 40 is Devin Bush from Michigan, 4.4 340. He is a very solid leader, but I do think he's pretty raw, but I didn't realize how athletic he was until the combine. 40.5-inch vertical jump, 124-inch broad jump. So his stock definitely went up. He's definitely going to be a first-round pick. I believe I had the Giants getting him in round 2. Now probably anywhere between maybe 17 and 30. Probably in that range. Maybe a team like the Oakland Raiders, who desperately needs linebacking help with one of their 2 later first-round picks. I could see them making this pick. Indianapolis needs a good middle linebacker. I know they need receivers more, but that could make sense as well. Overall, very solid combine. Those are the only 2 middle linebackers I'm going to talk about. There's no one else too special. Mac Wilson, Jermaine Pratt, Voshon Joseph, Trey Lamar. None of them are too crazy in my opinion. All of them are like late second, early third round prospects at best. Now on to cornerback, starting with Greedy Williams. His stock didn't really change. He only ran one drill, that's a 40-yard dash, and for someone of his height, 4.37 is nice. I expect him to be really good. We've seen some young corners the past few years be drafted and star right away, like Marshawn Lattimore, Denzel Ward, Jair Alexander, and I think Greedy Williams will be the same way. He's very solid in coverage, pretty good, decent hands, but I think his height and his frame and his speed are going to make quarterbacks not want to throw it to him. I think he's going to go top 10. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he does. Probably between like 8 and 14. Maybe the Lions get him. I think the Falcons could look at him. I think the Broncos could look at him. I think maybe even Cincinnati. I know they're not really being talked about. They could look at him. Or someone like Pittsburgh trades up. Maybe trades Antonio Brown for one of those picks. They're probably going to have to throw in like a 2 or a 3 to make it happen. But you get what I'm saying. Greedy Williams is a very talented player. He did get injured early on during the Combine, which is a little bit shaky. But it's not a serious injury. But still, it's an injury. And it's never a good thing. Next up is Byron Murphy from Washington. He is my number 2 corner in the draft. He has been, and he will remain that. As I said, his stock was unchanged. However, he was really solid during the drills. And I think his stock might have gone up a little bit. I actually forgot about him in my last mock. So in the comments, I said he'll go to the Rams at 31. Could happen. Now, I don't think he's on the board. I've had him going at 20 to the Steelers for a while, which is a very realistic possibility. 4.55 40, solid. Vert jump, broad jump, very solid. But I would say actually playing the cornerback in the drills, lots of production at Washington State, very nice instincts, an overall player who I think can be really solid. Before we want to talk about DeAndre Baker, I just want to say that the bench press number is wrong. It's not 4, it's 14. And last up at cornerback is DeAndre Baker from Georgia. His stock didn't really change. 4.52 40-yard dash. Solid. Did not run most of the drills. I'm not sure why. I guess it's his choice. He didn't really feel like it. So he didn't have an eventful combine, but he has a lot of college production. Very good for the Georgia Bulldogs. And overall, I still expect him to go in the first round. I forget where I had him on my last mock. Oh, yeah, I had him at the Vikings at 18. That's assuming they trade Xavier Rhodes, which I think is a more realistic possibility than most people think. So I didn't make any of these things for safeties because the good safeties didn't run any drills. I know Deontay Thompson was injured. Thompson's very solid in coverage, pretty decent run stopper. Nasir Adderley, I just can't find his combine numbers. Adderley is my number 1 safety in the class. I love his athleticism, and I know he would have done well. I don't know why on the combine page it doesn't have anything he did. I guess he didn't run drills. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from Florida. I believe he ran a sub 4.5 40. Solid in coverage. He can play strong safety, 3 safety, and corner. Like his versatility, could slip in the first round. And then Jonathan Abram from Mississippi State. Hard hitter. Good 40. Pretty athletic. Someone who also could slip in the late first, early second round pick. So that'll be the end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe. This took a lot of extra time to work on that I didn't necessarily have to do, but wanted to make this video. So hope you all enjoyed it and have a great day.